video demonstration, we're going to cover several scenarios around user personas, starting with our ad hoc integrator. In it, you can see we'll sign up for a quick trial, we'll get a pre-built integration flow, and then augment to meet our needs. So here we can see from the TIBCO Cloud website that I can simply go to the Try It Now button and get registered for a TIBCO Cloud Integration, or TCI, 30-day trial. This trial includes not only a fully functional TIBCO Cloud Integration instance, but also mastery functionality as well to help extend and augment the integration capabilities within TCI. It takes just a few seconds to fill in that form, select my data center, and then I get provisioned a fully up and running TIBCO Cloud Integration trial, which includes a self-guided walkthrough to educate you about how to use the product. Now from this point, what we're going to do is we're going to take that existing Granite State Marketing trial integration workflow that's been added for my guided walkthrough, and we're going to make a few changes to that using the simple interface with the TCI capabilities. Here I'll see as an ad hoc integrator, I can come into this design studio, I can see the different mappings that exist, I can see the existing functionality, and I have a baked in palette of functionality where I can make those changes. So in this case, I want to simply add a proper function to my full name field, and that allows me to have some added capabilities within that existing workflow. It's really simple to build, it's very quick for me to go in there and make those changes, and I can do that, as you saw, without any kind of a development studio or code-driven interface. Simple drag and drop methodologies allow me to do that. Now the next thing I want to do is I want to leverage an integration that's been pre-built. So I've had this from an outside partner, from TIBCO himself, from anywhere else who's built this integration in the past, and they've provided me those details. So I can simply import that functionality, come through, and make sure it fits my business need. So I can open up that individual map, I can see the workflow that exists here, I can see the connections that are in place, and now I have that up and running without any real work on my side. Now from here, what I want to do is make sure that that validates that I'm saving it into my solution. I can see everything comes through. There's lots of green check marks when I've done things right. I get yellow warning signs when I haven't. And what I want to do is extend this integration scenario to include some other endpoints. In this case, it's going to be a generic REST web service I need to invoke in order to do some lead enrichment inside of my integration workflow. So I can simply go to the marketplace, I added that connector, you can see the list of all the different logos there. I can come back into my design studio, make some changes to make sure that this is going to fit my naming convention, my self-documenting features within here. And now I can add a new connection. So when I do this, I'm going to pick that REST Web Services connector that I just installed, give it a quick name so I can know what I'm trying to work with, and then provide some information here. Now this is going to be some Swagger documentation that I'm putting in place in order to generate metadata or schema information around that endpoint that I want to integrate with. With a little bit of configuration here, I'm going to make a few changes just to make sure I get this working, provide my authentication token to that API. And then from there, I'll have a connection that's leveraging these details that allows me to communicate with that REST endpoint. Now that I have that connection created, you can see here on the left-hand side, I get my operations. So I'm going to add my post command, pick the object or entity that I want to work with, go into my field mapper and see the fields available to me. And simply drag that email left to right to say I want to enrich this lead based on the email address that I provided. Now, because I have contextual awareness, I can even go into that subsequent block, take the results from that post I made to the REST endpoint, and bring that enriched data into my next operation. So this allows me to do a lot of work around the different types of integration workflows, use it in context, and build out additional value using this simple drag and drop interface. And even here I can see again that I can go into my formula editor, I can add my own custom formulas, so this is not a one-to-one, this could be a structural change, both the higher object level with those blocks, and here at a data and field mapping level. Last, for lifecycle management, I want to make sure I add a comment about what I've done so that others can come back and see what has happened to this integration over time. So I have the ability that I can create a revision comment or a version in time where I can provide context around what I've done, and I can add my own details here, and then others can see this. This also gives me a way that I can revert back if I have any breaking changes that have been introduced. So this is a really handy feature right within the product that allows me to do that integration lifecycle management. Now that I've saved that integration, I can run that existing integration and the changes I've made by hitting that run button. What we see in the bottom is that I get a real-time update as far as what this integration is doing, as well as the most recent executions that have happened. So I can see here in the bottom when things work, I get my green check marks. But if there were any kind of errors or issues that would happen, I would get context within here to see what those errors were, how many occurred, how long this integration took to run. So it gives me my single pane of glass to manage this integration over time. Well, I can leverage the UI to do all my maintenance and monitoring of my integrations. I can also use embedded applications. There's a public REST API that provides all this information that I can simply take and embed in other locations. There are other tools we have, such as Scribe Scout, which is a Salesforce plugin or AppExchange product that allows me to see my integrations, see their health and status, see the different executions that are occurring, and the maps themselves that are existing. So this gives me another way that I can view and monitor these integrations in the apps that I'm already in my day-to-day job. It also allows me to provide that insight into the integrations that an ad hoc integrator has built to a broader audience of user personas as well, without having them inside the integration tool itself. Because the data is within Salesforce, I can even build in my own custom dashboards. There are some that are packaged with the products to see some of the integration health and status right here within my other tooling. In our next demo scenario, we're going to cover API management leveraging Mastery within TIBCO Cloud. This is going to allow you to provide documentation for these APIs, to define plans for access, and then to monitor and analyze what's been happening within those APIs. So here within TIBCO Cloud, I can see my APIs hexagon, launch that, and get into the management console for my API management solution or Mastery. I can also open up the public-facing API documentation portal. This is going to allow me to provide information for developers out there in the real world to build and deploy integrations or applications around my APIs. This is a fully customized portal, so I can make this match my brand and however I want to bring that out to market. Now from here, we're going to see the documentation around the APIs that I want to publish. You'll notice that I'm using this lead enrichment API, which is actually the same one I did in my demo, but there are other APIs I can manage here as well. This gives me the ability to see that Swagger documentation, which is where I generated that code snippet that I put in my TIBCO Cloud Integration demo to build the connection around that REST API. So now that I have access to the documentation, we need to define how do I get access to it, and that's going to be within a plan inside of Mastery. So I'll see I have the ability to generate custom plans based on exactly what my users need. Here I can see within that API definition, I have all my different APIs I'm publishing, my marketing API, which is the thing I started off with that lead enrichment, and then from here I can see all the information around that API. So the information around how to access it and what it does is great, but now with that package designer, I can take the same marketing API, I can see what type of user I want to find, I can take a look at that designer, and here I can navigate visually exactly which endpoints, what different methods I want to give them access to, and I can do so at a package by package component. So here within that same package, I can now add access to a different API, a different set of endpoints, and a different set of methods with a simple number of clicks. Once I save that, that's now live, so that user can get access to those different endpoints. So now I have public documentation that I can look into view and build integrations around. I've got a designer to build out how people access that. The next step is figuring out who's been accessing it and what's been happening. So I can use the analyze function in Mastery to see the type of traffic that's been happening against my different APIs. I can view it across it globally. I can look at each individual API itself, but I can see the number of calls that are coming in, the kind of traffic that I see over time, successes and failures. This is really critical for once I have these integrations around these APIs and these APIs are public to know exactly what's been happening with them, who's been using them, and how much success they've been having in order for me to figure out the next step for these different APIs that are out there in the world. Now in our next demo scenario, we're going to talk a bit more about the Citizen Integrator. We've recently introduced the TIBCO Cloud Integration for Salesforce, which we can see available on the TIBCO Cloud Integration website. This is a Salesforce Lightning native app that allows a Citizen Integrator to quickly provide connectivity from Salesforce to other target SaaS applications. This, just like the Scout functionality we saw in the earlier demo, allows users to do this right from within Salesforce, so they stay within the tools that they're leveraging and they don't need to leave that user interface. This also leverages machine learning, which provides an automated mapping, and it learns with user inputs. So we can see here it's simple to get installed, just like any other Salesforce app should be, and that allows us to use this from completely within that Salesforce interface. So now that we have our app installed, you can see it right here within the Lightning Launcher. To begin, we're going to begin creating a smart map, which is really just going to be the way that we get into the mapping dialog. We're going to give it a quick name, so this is going to have some context around what's going to happen. In this case, we're going to sync some data from Salesforce to Marketo. Now we're going to pick that object we care about in Salesforce, and we really care about when we want to move the data. So after an insert occurs, I can select that. So it's very simple to see how this data should be flowing. Then we simply need to pick a target application. So in this case, we're going to pick a connection we've already built to Marketo. There, we do the same type of thing where we build that connection around an object. And then we'll simply get a list of fields that we want to start to map. So here, we can pick a couple of fields that we care about mapping between Salesforce and Marketo. And once we pick these, we're going to start to see some of the machine learning come into play, where we'll see the number of, or percentage of matches that we found for the fields that we wish to map. And so you can see these things here now where we can start to make those different percentages around what the match should be. So it saves me a lot of time and energy from trying to figure out where these things need to go. But if I want to change those things manually, I have that ability to do so. So I can do both letting that application pick those mappings for me, or I can manually make those changes, and what's happening behind the scenes is the mapping engine is learning from me. So now I can save that map, I can activate that smart map, and it's going to allow that to start picking up changes that are happening inside of Salesforce. So now we'll see as I navigate out to my leads, I can go ahead, add a new lead, and what we'll see is that that smart map is, since it's active, is going to pick up this event that's occurring. So I'm going to add in this lead, provide my information, go ahead and I can hit save. And what that will do is that will trigger the smart map that I've created that's sitting there listening for these type of events that are occurring, and push that data over to Marketo. So I can see here I've just created that lead. I can see it within my list here. And if I look back at my smart map and take a look at that map that I've created, I can see that it was successfully run just a few seconds ago. And here's the data that was mapped across. And here, again, just to kind of prove end-to-end, that we do have that lead is in existence in Marketo as that target application with the data that I've chosen to map from Salesforce into Marketo. Now we can see that since we've captured that newly generated lead, that's all well and good. But what we've done also is created a couple of other smart maps that are already pre-existing that's just going to go and capture updates from Salesforce into Marketo. And we even have one to capture deletes. So if I go back into my leads list and I come back to that lead I've just generated, I'm going to go ahead and edit that and make a couple of subtle changes to this individual lead. Now, by keeping these two systems in sync and up to date with that information, it enables all my users within Marketo to have access to this really great data that I'm constantly making changes to inside of Salesforce. So again, I made that change. I can go ahead and look at that smart map. I can see that it's been processed. I can see the data that it's processed through. And then I can even go into Marketo and I can check those updates that have occurred. So again, I have that ability to, at every stage of the operation, see what the smart map's doing, see what it's been up to, see the data that's been processed right from within that same Salesforce interface. So again, here I can see that data has been changed. Everything is as it should be with the sync up and running between the two applications. Now, as many of you know as well, deletes are generally kind of a tricky mechanism to be able to capture, but here within the smart map, it behaves exactly as if it was an insert or an update. So if I go through and I delete that lead, it will trigger off that smart map, allowing me to get that generated back over to Marketo. So even the trickier applications, trickier integrations that you'll have to deal with become very simple and straightforward for a citizen integrator who's living within Salesforce, can see that data and get the power of that integration, the really simple user interface directly within Salesforce. It gets smarter every time you use it, so it's something that can grow with your experience and can provide a lot of power and information right from within your Salesforce interface. Our final demo scenario is going to focus on an integration specialist. What we're going to do is we're going to work with a supplier who's got an existing SOAP API that they've leveraged for purchase order information. Now, what we want to do is be able to modernize this without having to reevaluate and rebuild that entire API. So we want to add a REST API around the existing SOAP API. So we want to be able to create that more modern interface and then also allow us to deploy this wherever we want our customers to have access to it. So it could be a public cloud, a hybrid or a private cloud, or even as a service. We want to be able to build those event-driven serverless functions off of this new modernized API and bring that into market where our retailers want to have access to it. So once we build that REST API and we build the ability to deploy it wherever we want it to live, our omnichannel retail partner is going to be able to invoke that through REST, submit POs as a serverless event-driven function within AWS Lambda. So we'll see this end-to-end deployment using TIBCO Cloud Integration to take that existing API, modernize it, and deploy it wherever we want our retailers to be able to have access to it. So now to begin our journey, we're going to go ahead and start off with that SOAP API. We're going to go ahead and test that to make sure that that SOAP API works and provides back the information that we care about. So I can see here that that is valid and the SOAP API is working. Next, I want to go into TIBCO Cloud Integration and start to model out that API. I want to create that API-led integration with an API-first mentality. So I can name this particular API spec, I can build it graphically, and it will allow me to now use this web interface to do my creation of that new modern API. Now I can start to add resources to this API, allowing me to define what the requests and responses are going to be and the different methods that exist for this particular API endpoint. Now from here, what I'll do is I'll go and take a look at an API I've already started to build out for this demo for my purchase order integration I'm going to build. I can see that this API is here, I can see the different components of it, and I can export this API as JSON or YAML. So I can export that API, or I can even preview it all from within the same tab where I can see here the Swagger documentation that's been generated automatically for the API that I've been creating. Now to implement this new API, I'm going to go ahead and leverage the visual design environment of TIBCO Cloud Integration. This is going to allow me to quickly create my REST API that I want to leverage and all the details around how that's going to operate. When I look at this, I can build a project which is going to generate a lot behind the scenes, but also giving my different deployment targets where I can see I've got my different containers, I've got cloud or app space, so I can deploy that where I need, build once, deploy many. So as we can see here, I can go ahead and hit finish, and it's going to start to generate all the details I need in order to start to create this new API. So behind the scenes, you can see everything popping up, and allows me to start to leverage the drag and drop interface to create my inputs and my replies right here within the Visual Design Studio of TIBCO Cloud Integration. Now I can see the APIs on the bottom left-hand side of the screen. And this is going to allow me to start to build out that REST API that is, again, going to leverage the SOAP API down the line. So I can simply drag and drop that up to my Project Explorer on the top left, and it will start to generate a lot of the components I need to build out this REST API. So I can see that happening natively right here on the screen. I can drag and drop that to my design palette in the middle, and it will start to generate for me all the components I need in order to build out this REST API. So it gives me a lot of information, it gives me a lot of ability to quickly create these different endpoints, and really allows me to be a lot faster on delivery of these as an integration specialist. So what I want to do next is I want to start to really build this out and complete it. So I want to import the WSDL of that SOAP API that I saw and I tested at the beginning of the demo. So I can simply go through and import that WSDL, and it's going to walk me through the wizard to generate that and bring that into context within my development studio here. So as soon as I've done that, I can see I have access to that within my Project Explorer on the left, and I can again drag and drop that onto my palette, and it will generate for me not only my SOAP API that I can work with, but I get that invoke method. So it gives me the tools I'm going to need in order to create this inside the design studio. Now that I have that there, I can start to leverage the design palette and start to wire these components together. So I can simply take those, wire these different activities together, and then leverage some of the other tools such as AutoMap to automatically generate the linkage between these different APIs that I'm starting to leverage within my palette. So here you can see it's very simple to drag and drop and then initiate that AutoMap capability, which will save me time and effort to go through and create these automatic linkages. From here, I can go through and also use my auto-fix capability to go through and make sure that what I've done is going to be viable and that it should work for me going forward. Now we're going to spend a lot of time talking about SOAP within this demo, but that by no means is the only thing that we can connect with. We have on the right-hand side in the palette many different endpoints that we can start to work with. We have the ability to connect with EDI and HL7 for that B2B type integration. We can install additional connectivity here as well. We see we have Kafka and Amazon, SFTP and TCP. So whatever technology we need to leverage, wherever the data resides, we have the ability to add that within our palette within the right-hand side. So now that we've put this together, what I want to do is I want to go ahead and generate my Maven config. So I can see that very easily is done with our right-click menus within the interface. This will allow me to do this automatically, and I can automate the deployment leveraging this now. So this makes it really simple for me to generate the artifacts that I need to move this forward and deploy it where it needs to go. Now once I've generated my config, my next step is that I want to actually get this out and deploy it. So I can see I've pushed this out, and I can from here initiate my Jenkins pipeline in order to walk through the process that's necessary. So I can check that code out. I can walk it through my analysis and start to use my unit tests against that set of code that has been generated. I can build that out, push it, and then deploy it to where I need to go in order to now take that and deploy it in the environments that I need for my retailer to gain access to it. Now once I've done that, I can go into my artifacts and I can start to pull up the unit test reports from the deployment process. Now here you can see that I've leveraged the standard HTML report structure. I could customize this depending upon what I need, so I can really make this fit the environment that I'm working in and the look and feel that I'm requiring. But I can get that same piece of content, that same value from the report structure of my unit test in order to move this forward in my development lifecycle. So now inside my Enterprise Administrator, I can see that that application that I've been generated has been deployed here on premise. It also has been deployed into a Kubernetes Docker. So I can see here as well where this lives. So that same application that I've generated has been pushed out to on-prem, to Kubernetes as a Docker, and pushed into my TIBCO Cloud Integration environment as well, as I can see here. So we've now been able to do that build once and deploy many within the demonstration already. Now next is going to be how do we want to test this? So we want to be able to see this in the browser. I can see here my implementation of this integration, but the next step is going to be how do I want to leverage this? So I can see that I have this open API spec which I can navigate out to, and this will allow me to both visualize what that API is supposed to do, I can see the different models that it's required, and then I can live test it from my web browser within the same TIBCO Cloud Integration tab. And I can see down here at the bottom the reference that came back from that working API that I've now exposed to TIBCO Cloud Integration. So now that I've seen that it's working live within my open API spec, the next things are going to be what do I want to find out more around that integration. So back within my application view, I can see the metrics. I can see what the CPU and the memory looks like. I can see what the network speed has been, and then even the performance that's been happening around that particular application that I've deployed. So within this one same client, within this one browser, I have access to not only the test utilities, but the management and monitoring, and then I can get down to the level of logging. So from here, I can see with filtration views what's been happening. I have search capabilities to be able to find exactly what's been going on within that log. So it allows me to really easily fine-tune this integration. Now to round out our demo, we're going to build out our event-driven application and deploy it as a serverless capability for our retailer to be able to invoke from AWS Lambda. So I'm going to simply create a new app, and I'm going to build out a Flogo application using the web native client to create this serverless application. I'm going to start this off as a blank flow. I have the trigger capability if I wanted to catch something coming into me, so something from Kafka, something from an HTTP client, or in this case, as I want to use this within an AWS Lambda trigger, I can simply start with something blank and then build it out using that web native client. So as we said, I'm going to go ahead and simply grab that Lambda function, and then I'm going to be able to copy some of the information that I've already generated from the APIs I've built. So I can go ahead and paste in that schema. This is going to be really quick for me to be able to deploy and build it out, but also I can start to leverage this ability to copy that schema for the inputs and outputs for this particular flow that I'm working on. Now I can get into the configuration and start to do all my mapping. So I'm going to start to configure what does my input and output look like? Where do these things map to? How should this process be invoked? So I can see with a simple web interface that I can do all my mapping with my point and click capabilities. Now, because it's going to be a Lambda function, I can get rid of that return capability and simply come down, and what I want to do is invoke that REST API that I've generated earlier in this demo. So I can pick that activity, I can start to build my methods, I can paste in that URL that I know I need to hit, and then again, start to build a configuration around how does data need to pass to this particular API. So I can see with my input settings, I can define what those schemas look like, and again, simply copy and pasting that JSON from point to point, and I can allow that to build out my mapping capability. So I have the ability here to see this really simply and succinctly what the data is supposed to do, where it's supposed to go, and how it's supposed to be built within this web client. Now I'll also add in a little log here just so I can capture the output from that REST call in order to have that as another troubleshooting methodology or simply within there. You see within the list there's many different activity types that you can leverage in order to build out these functions and flows leveraging TCI, TIBCO Cloud Integration. Now I've gone ahead and pushed that app so in order to be able to build it up and leverage it within my Lambda function. So I've used this web native client to now design, test, and push this event-driven serverless app that I can leverage within my retail scenario. So I can come over to my Amazon application, I can go ahead and I can configure this, I can test it out, I can pass data across to that newly generated event-driven application, and I'll see live feedback come from within here. So it's been really easy for me to set up and test, really easy for me to deploy, and again, as I test this out, I'm going to see that data come back from the application that I have just pushed, and as you can see here, I have the results set with that PO reference information listed right there in the middle of the screen. So leveraging TIBCO Cloud Integration, we've been able to build, deploy, modify, and run integrations as an ad hoc integrator, as a citizen integrator, and as an integration specialist.